So here's the thing. I was talking with my wife the other day, and she asked me how I got into horror films. And I was sat there wondering, and I was like, it was actually my grands that got me into horror films. And she was like, really? And I was like, yeah. I was like, so I told her a couple of these stories. Basically, I was around my grands one night. It was like my parents were out or something, and I turned around to my gran and I kept opening up the drawer underneath her telly, and I saw this like videotape, and it had like a werewolf on the front of it. It was called American Werewolf in London, and I was intrigued by like the image on the front of the VHS. And for all of you young kids out there, a VHS is a videotape, which I guess I've not probably got many young people listening to this, but anyway, in case you're not familiar with it, the story is about two friends called David and Jack, and they're basically American tourists, and they go, I think it's in Yorkshire. I can't remember. Maybe London. Maybe because obviously that's what it's called, American Werewolf in London. But hey, hey, they're on like the Dells or like this field area, and a werewolf attacks them, and Jack dies, but David doesn't. He wakes up in the hospital. Blah blah blah. He's got werewolfism or whatever you want to call it. Um, but yeah, so I was like looking at this VHS, and my gran kept saying to me, if I look at it, she's going to put it on and make me watch it. And she was true to her word because I kept looking at it, and she put it on and I watched it. And I mean, I would just want to point out at this point, I'm probably only about 11 or 12, so probably too young to be watching this film. And yeah, but I was watching it, and I didn't really get too scared of Jack coming back because he comes back quite a lot, like to speak to David. I know he's dead, but spoilers by the way, in case you want to watch this. But he comes back and he talks to David and starts talking to him about his like werewolfism, and he looks like just basically like a zombie the first time he comes back. He's a bit green and scratched up. Then he comes back, and each time he keeps coming back, he's a bit more decayed and looks a bit more dead. If you can look any more dead than dead. But yeah, anyway, yeah. So the story is, that didn't scare me too much. The one thing that really terrified me in that film was when David actually started turning into the werewolf. Now the visual effects for that were absolutely incredible for 1981, but it scared the absolute living hell out of me. The noises he was making, it just petrified me. And I mean, I'm like 12 years old at my grand's house, who lived just up the road from me. And then afterwards, I just had to walk home on my own because my gran was going to bed. I mean, admittedly, she stood at the top of the drive to watch me walk down the road to my house, but there was no street lights, and I had to go past like a pitch black field, which is where they got attacked. And I was, oh my god, I've never been so scared in all my life. But it kind of gave me this thrill, like, oh, this rush of like, oh, maybe there's a werewolf, maybe there's not. I might have to run in a minute, and I did. I sprinted home. I did not hang about. But yeah, basically that started off my whole horror fantasy, like kind of I guess. Well, it was either that or it was in Jaws. Actually, thinking about it, because I was around my other grand's house, and I was allowed to watch Jaws. I was like 10, because I mean Jaws isn't awful. And in case again you don't know what Jaws is, which I'm assuming all of you do, it's about a shark attacking Amity Island, um, Islands Bay, and that's based in like New England or something. And yeah, there's this big ass shark then just like killing all these people, which you don't really see a lot. So like I was allowed to watch it when I was like 10 or 11, which I was really glad of, because I think that probably was the first horror film I ever actually watched. Yeah, it would have been. But anyway, I was around my grand's house watching it, and my mum was always like, yes, he can watch it, but just tell him to turn away when the head scene comes on. And if you guys don't know what that is, that's just go on YouTube and check that out. But basically, this dead guy's head pops out of the bottom of this boat, and that scared the absolute living beep out of me. I've never, like, that was my first, yeah, that was my first experience of horror. And I was mortified. I was like, oh my god. And I can remember just going cold and still and just like my eyes wide open. And my gran looked at me just like, oh no, I forgot to tell him to turn away. She wasn't like being mean or nothing. She just genuinely forgot. God rest her soul. I miss her dearly. But yeah, she just totally forgot to tell me to look away or like tell me to just like put my face behind the pillow. And yeah, because of that, I was not able to sleep properly for a good few weeks because every time I closed my eyes, I saw the guy's face, and yeah, it just wasn't pleasant for me. But again, I love Jaws, great film, absolutely one of my favorite horrors like of all time. And again, it's kind of held up. The effects were great, and it's got the classic line at the end where the big shark's got a barrel in his mouth, and you just hear the guy go, "Smile, you son of a," and then he pulls the trigger. But yeah, absolutely great, fantastic film. If you haven't watched either of those two, actually, I suggest you go and watch them because American Werewolf in London, it's always entertaining. I've never been bored when I've rewatched it. Same with Jaws. Um, Saying that, I kind of like Jaws 2 better, or do I? No, I think I prefer Jaws. Jaws is great. Um, Another film I can kind of remember watching, probably a bit younger than I should have done, was Lake Placid. And again, giant crocodile. I don't really remember a lot about this film because I don't think I've watched it since. But the one of the big things that stuck out for me again was this diver. I think like got pulled onto the boat and he'd been bitten in half, and you saw like his guts and stuff. That kind of traumatized me a little bit. Again, I was only about 10 or 11, so I was like, "Oh my god!" And it was like, "Oh, I'm a bit scared of this." Um, yeah. And the only other part I can actually remember about that film was like this old lady or something feeding a whole cow, like a live cow, to the crocodile. But I can remember it looking absolute like awful. Like for the CGI in the time the film came out, it did not look great. Yeah. The other, so going back to my gran who forgot to tell me to turn away from Jaws. I can remember she had these loads of old horror films on VHS, all black and white, all spooky, all kind of scary, but not overly scary. And she had, I think it was A Creature from the Black Lagoon, which kind of scared me. It wasn't like, that's not overly scary because it's black and white and it's not like terrifying. But yeah, I'll put all the pictures of what these guys look like up on my Instagram if you want to go and follow that. I'll leave a link in the description below. Um, it was just kind of a bit spooky, that one, because that's probably why I'm terrified of water. I'm not gonna lie, is because of Jaws and the Creature of the Black Lagoon. Like I cannot think of anything worse than going into a body of water, looking down, and just seeing pitch black. Like that terrifies me. Even the thought of it now is giving me shivers, and it's scaring me a little bit. But yeah, there was that, and I think it was called Night of the Demon, where there was like this demon on a railroad track that came around and like killed people. Again, I wasn't overly scared of it. It was a bit spooky, but I'm not sure. The demon looked grotesque, but I'm not sure if that's just like the old effects, like making it look scarier than it actually was, or maybe my mind's playing tricks on me. Anyway, I'll be having a look at the photo in a minute when I download it to put it on my Instagram. Yeah, which also got me on to thinking. They told me some absolute horror stories about the village I grew up in. One of them was, so this one's like not overly scary, but it's kind of like, ooh, it's a bit weird to think about. So I got told there was this big forest at the top of the village I lived in called Castle Hill, and it apparently a rock or a pebble came down from Castle Hill all the way down to the river, which was probably, I would say, about a 10-minute walk to get to the start of the woods to the river. And it's supposed to have rollen the whole way down, drink from the river, and then roll all the way back up into the woods. And it would be a different stone each year. And I think like the whole premise of it was kind of to stop maybe kids from like going out late because it was meant to scare them. It's quite an old one, that one. Like I think my gran was telling me like her gran told her that or something. So it's a pretty old one. And then of course there was a classic, the Black Panther of Cranbourne, which was I think every English county has a village. Maybe every village in England actually, or the UK, has a Black Panther sighting or story that can remember there was a guy, I'm not going to name drop, but a friendly old guy that I used to go and help every so often in the garden. And I actually worked with him for a little while. And I can remember him telling me the stories of when he saw the Black Panther. And the story basically goes, yeah, I saw it running through the field the other night. Yeah, it looked like a Labrador. It was about the size of a Labrador. And I was like, are you sure it just wasn't a Labrador? It's just like, but yeah. The the Black Cat's a classic village story for every story, I think. Village, sorry. We also had a lane just past the doctor's surgery. There was a little one car lane, as I used to call them, like the little village country roads, and it was called Grug's Lane. And supposedly there's meant to be a ghost of a monk that walks up and down there. And we went there or walked around the village aimless times through the night quite often because there wasn't a lot else to do. Not being loud or rowdy or rude, we just used to walk around and chat and talk. Sometimes we go up into the park at night and, hear all the spooky stuff up there. But yeah, the monk then that was down Grug's Lane, yeah, supposedly he just walked past the vicar's house, which, I guess kind of relates to the vicar, monks, monastery kind of thing. I'm not 100% sure, but we never saw a single sighting of this supposed ghost. The only time in recent times I've heard anyone mention it was when there was I guess you'd know him as the village drunk. Again, I'm not going to name drop. Or like part of that kind of family, and he was convinced he saw a monk down there, but it was also, there was people that used to walk around there with hoods on because you wear a hoodie when it's cold, right? And he was probably drunk out of his mind. He'd just come out of the local pub, and saw nothing, just maybe mindless drunkism, I guess. I've got to stay up saying ism, like for everything. Ism is like, doesn't refer to something. Well, it does. I don't know. I'm waffling now. Anyway, getting back onto track. The last horror story I can remember from the village actually come from one of my friends. And I can't remember the biker's name that he gave. But long story short, there used to be chains. We used to have chain swings in the park. And you could hear them rattle every so often, like when it got windy, or if the wood moved slightly, it would like jingle. And he used to tell us that apparently that was the ghost of a biker that fell off, and his head got caught in the chain and ripped the top of his head off. And he was coming back to look for the top of his head, or like someone's top of his head. And the chains rattling was him bringing it to whip your head off, basically to put on his own or something like that. And I was like, oh, that's a load of rubbish. But when those chains started rattling up in the park, you couldn't help but think about the story, and you did start to wonder, like, oh, maybe we should, get out of the park and maybe go back into the light areas, because it was pitch black up there again. No street lights in the park. So yeah, that's basically my love of horror and a few of the stories. I hope you enjoyed that. I quite enjoy talking to myself and to you guys, and I'm glad you stood here and listened, or sat here, stood, whatever you're doing, and listened to me. Sorry if I waffle a bit, it's just who I am. You'll get used to it. So yeah, make sure you come back next week. I don't know what I'll be talking about. I'll probably have some random thoughts through the week that I'm going to want to talk about or put in my podcast. But best know I've got a few episodes lined up of stuff that I do want to talk about. Maybe I'll do another film one, but maybe it'll be about kids. I did want to talk about kids' films, and there was weird stuff that just randomly I was looking up, and I was like, oh, that would be good. So yeah, come back next week and we'll talk about some kid films and some dark stuff that's happened in them, I guess. So as always, make sure you follow, make sure you like, it helps all that, blah, blah, blah. Thanks for sticking around, guys, and speak to you next week.